Hello, I'm Barbara Gahn Mueller, and you are in for a treat. This is a period in our history where our relationships are very, very important because sometimes we're going to be upset. There are things that we may not like in the world, and there are things that we may not like in our life. So I want to ask you to sit back and listen and understand and pay attention. God bless you. I'm Barbara Gahn Mueller, and you are listening to peacepodcast.org. And if you're one of my followers, I thank you twice. To be able to be listening to the wisdom of these guests each week brings you into harmony with yourself and the world. And that's our goal today. This Peace Podcast is brought to you for peace, happiness, and mutually assured survival. Listen to those words. We have a brand new website now, mutuallyassuredsurvival.world. But I want to introduce today's guest. I'm walking into my study and I'm thinking, who should be on Peace Podcast next week? And this book, A New Map for Relationships, pops out at me. Creating True Love at Home and Peace on the Planet. Now, this couple that I'm going to introduce have been married 58 years. That doesn't mean they had roses every day. It means that they learned from the angers that they felt. And I can't stop reading this book. This is Dorothie and Martin Hellman. And I am just so honored you're here. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Inside the book, he wrote to Barbara Mueller, with thanks for all you do to make the world a better place. That brings tears to my eyes and joy to my heart, because that's my goal. That's why I was born. And my grandfather said I was going to be a peacemaker after he realized that war is not the way to go. And I have been so grateful. What if you never had another fight or argument? What if doing that helped bring peace to the world? I wish my grandfather and grandmother had this book. They fought all the time, and they were Hungarians, and I decided I'm never going to marry a Hungarian man because I don't want to spend my life Hungarian arguments about what to make for dinner or whatever, stupid little things. They would argue for hours about what chicken to buy in the store. And I thought, oh my goodness, why couldn't my grandpa be alive to watch this podcast today? So, the two of you are so special. Dorothie and Martin Hellman married as polar opposites. By learning to honor each other's perspectives, they captured the true love they felt in their initial infatuation. And they fell in love with the world as a whole and found that same principles that saved their marriage, compassionate, holistic thinking, will save the earth. Does that describe the two of you?
Now it does, but what would you say about 45 years ago, honey?
Yes, it describes us now. We had to learn to respect and love each other. And
we didn't at first.
We didn't know how at first.
We used to fight I sometimes say we used to fight all the time, to which you say,
not all the time.
Well, I'm laughing because this is exactly the experience I had with my grandparents and oftentimes with my parents. And my grandfather would always say, "You're the peacemaker." And I would say, "Thank you, Grandpa." Let's get right into this book because I am so excited about the two of you being here. I'm going to ask you a question. The subtitle of your book is Creating the True Love at Home and Peace on the Earth. That's a very appropriate way to find out on February when our Rotary theme is peace and conflict resolution and love on Valentine's Day. So with that love, what did you find could be appropriate for the two of you and also translate into world peace? What a question. You may have to take the whole hour for that one.
Well, we haven't had an argument in over 20 years.
But we've been married almost 58 years. It'll be 58 years next month.
And
I can see that. You love each other. I can just see that love transferring to each other. But tell us, Dorothea, what was this?
Well, one of the most important things is it can be really exciting to resolve conflict with love.
But
And
it's easy.
And it's
it
important,
is easy once you learn how to do it.
but it took us time to learn how to do it. Like, it's not as if we just made the decision. We actually made the decision over 40 years ago that we are going to do what was right for the relationship. And it took us about 20 years to get to the point that we never had another fight, including you're coming to making peace with your anger, which there's a section of that in the book. Oh, and by the way, people can download a free PDF of the book. We've made it freely available, and you'll make that link available.
A New Map for Relationships is going to be our sponsor today, and I'm going to put the link for the PDF so that people can take it home and look at it. I kept underlining the pages of the book that talked about arguing and how you two were allowing the arguments to be able to reach deeper into Dorothea's childhood. The arguments reach deeper into what she was fearing in herself, right, Dorothea?
Well, yes, I had to make peace with my anger. And I had to allow myself to learn that it's okay to be angry. But I'm not angry anymore. I don't get angry anymore. I got so okay with being angry that I don't get angry anymore.
She spent 6 months on anger, by the way, which was scary for me at times.
Well, Martin, did you find that she really is able to take that anger and put it in the place that would help her live her life better? Did that come to you very
Oh, yeah. So there's a story in the book where probably 35 years ago, Dorothy's working on anger as part of that 6 month process or more. And I was so proud of myself because I wasn't scared by her anger, which I used to be. She's kind of small, except when she, as I say in the book, when she got angry, she seemed like a huge monster that was going to eat me alive. And so I said, I want you to know, honey, I love you even though you're angry. And what did you respond?
You have to love me because I'm angry.
And so I went off crestfallen because here I was so proud of myself. And then I realized a couple of things. First of all, it was ridiculous to expect someone who was angry to be appreciative. And secondly, at that point in time, not now, but at that point in time, there were some things Dorothy could get in touch with that I needed to hear that she could only get in touch with when she was angry. And so if I had a magic wand and could make her anger go away, I wouldn't wave it. So I came back to her and I said, I do love you because you're angry. Which
That's a wonderful
surprised
statement.
you.
Love you because you are angry. Is that right, Dorothea?
That's right. So on the international level, we have to respect and appreciate each other no matter what.
Well, you say on page whatever it is, global challenges require the same effort and shift in mindset. So the solutions advocated here will not only solve both as well as other global challenges that are on the horizon.
Yes, that's another important point, that it's not just peace and nuclear weapons that are the issue. We talk about them a lot in the book, but really we do say, I'm pretty sure in the book, and I know I've said it in talks, that the real problem is not nuclear weapons or war or climate change or any of those other threats that we seem to be facing. Those are symptoms of a deeper underlying problem, which is the chasm between the godlike physical power that technology's given human beings and our at best irresponsible adolescent behavior as a species. Sometimes I used to behave like I was a 2-year-old. I mean, I would in our fights. I don't anymore. And so I make the analogy that humanity is like a 16-year-old kid with a new driver's license who somehow gets his hands on a 500 horsepower Ferrari. We're either going to grow up really fast or we're going to kill ourselves. And it may be foolish to hope to think that we could grow up, but we're working for that. And that's one reason we wrote the book.
Dorothea, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think one of the simple things is, one of the things we do at an international level is we start saying, well, you did this, and then the other person says, well, you did this, and the other person says, well, you did this, and that's a disaster. There's no way out of that.
Which is where we used to be too. So we have compassion for them. It's not like we judge them, but it doesn't work. It didn't work for us, and it doesn't work internationally. So one other thing, coming back to the theme of creating true love at home and end peace on the planet, is there's a soundbite in the book, "Get curious, not furious," which really links them. When Dorothy used to do things that seemed crazy to me, I used to treat her like she was crazy, which drove her crazy, which convinced me I was right that she was crazy, which kept the whole cycle going. And we do the same internationally. We need to be asking more questions. Why did Russia do what it's done. It doesn't mean justify it, but it means that, oh, and by the way, in Ukraine, as an example, 4 months after the invasion, so in the summer of 2022, a poll was done by the University of Chicago, which I verified, if anything, was anti-Russian in bias, a whole bunch of things like that. But in it, 85% of the Ukrainians polled blamed Russia for the war, which is no surprise. But 70% also held their own government responsible, and 58% held the United States government responsible. They didn't ask the people why they said that, but I have some idea having studied this. And this is an example where we need to get more curious instead of furious, and instead of writing it off as Russian propaganda, we need, which it is partly, we need to ask more questions. And
Well,
there are two
curious
stories in the
instead of
book.
furious is perfect. Curious instead of furious is a wonderful model to raise the consciousness of why things happen, even in our personal relationships, right, Dorothea?
Yes, especially in our personal relationships.
So there are two stories in the book. One, okay, I won't go into it. Okay, long story. She just said, okay, good point. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. This is why we have 20 minutes. We want to hear your take on your book and why. Okay, let's just go back to why did you decide to write this book? You do say, since societal behavior drives from our individual beliefs and behaviors, and then you write this book, knowing that that's the reason. We invite you to join us on a voyage of discovery and healing. That's your whole premise, isn't it?
Well, we had these stories that we had coming out of our explorations and our growth, and we felt like we wanted to share them.
Well, and there's another thing. What got us started initially on this was not a desire to save the world. It was a necessity of saving our marriage. And Dorothie was the one who was interested in that. I didn't even realize there was a problem because I grew up in a Woody Allen movie. I mean, I grew up in the New York Jewish culture, and fighting was normal. I described Dorothie in the book as the princess and the pea of relationship conflict, and I say this in a very positive sense. And I'll let people read the book to see why I say that in a positive sense. But then Dorothie got us involved in a group which was known as Creative Initiative Foundation, later Beyond War. And Robert Mueller, who unfortunately passed away,
Yes.
your husband, spoke to us, I remember, in the 80s, and about the UN, where he was had a high
Secretary General.
And he said the UN is the high school of nations. It's not the college of nations. And so that really helped put it in perspective that we needed to keep growing and we need to keep maturing. It's like that 16-year-old kid with a new driver's license analogy that I just used. So anyway, I reasoned that what got us involved and what got most of the people involved in Beyond War was the desire to improve their interpersonal relationships, their marriages primarily. And so we needed to write a book about that and connecting the two, which it always did.
Well, you're really, really thinking our national security. You really are. As I said, in this, I feel like I'm reading a book of history of my era. And it's like, wow, if we would have only understood that our national security is based upon conversations, relationships, getting to know that the enemy as real, as Dalai Lama said, have a picnic with your enemy before you shoot them, and you will see that they are real. What do you think?
And there's another point, which is we need to make peace with our shadow sides. The Bible said, love your neighbor as yourself, but it missed something out. Most people hate their neighbors the way they hate themselves. And that's because they have a shadow side that they can't accept. It's the part of ourselves that's so despicable, so abhorrent to our conscious minds that we can't even admit consciously that it exists. And it runs us around. There are stories in the book about this. And the front piece of the book, which is a verse from Stephen Mitchell's very unliteral translation of the Tao Te Ching, said, a great nation is like a great man. Having erred, he recognizes it. Having recognized it, he admits it. Having admits it, he corrects it. He regards his critics as his most benevolent teachers and his shadow as his enemies, as the shadow that he himself casts.
I think I don't even know how to respond to that because that's exactly the way I feel. I get hard on myself for something that doesn't really matter. And then I think if I'm hard on myself and I really love myself, what are we doing to the people we love?
Oh, actually, a good point. Just like we haven't had a fight in about 20 years, I haven't kicked myself in about 20 years. I used to drive home after saying something stupid or thinking I'd said something stupid, and I'd be kicking myself, and I'd try to stop kicking myself, and I'd start doing it again. But I haven't done that in 20 years. We had to learn to make peace with ourselves, most fundamentally. That's where peace between us begins and peace in the world begins.
When you have peace with yourself, regardless of the situation that you find your body and you find yourself in, it allows you to be peaceful for others. I have run many boards, and I have found that's the secret, to not react, to not get upset, but to pay attention and just remember that you're the peace other people may need. Do you find that to be the way your 20-year relationship improved?
I'm trying to understand the question.
Yes, it's absolutely the way we improved.
It was making peace
And
with
there's another
yourself.
point. There's a story. I don't think it's in the book, but if people go to the my Stanford homepage, I'm a professor at Stanford, and so if they go Google Stanford and Hellman, my homepage will come up as one of the top hits, if not the top hit. And then look for opinions, and then look for Resist Not Evil. This was an essay I wrote on the 125th birthday of Gandhi for the Gandhi Institute. And it's a story about how when I was working on another book, this one in 1987, Breakthrough Emerging New Thinking, which was published simultaneously in Russian in Moscow and in English in New York during that period of very rapid change in Soviet-American relations. Oh, and by the way, William Colby, the former director of the CIA, called it a monumental achievement, or words to that effect. But it's a story about how Alexander Nikitin, one of the Soviets who we were working with, really got me pissed off. And I used Resist Not Evil, which is in the Sermon on the Mount, and most Christians don't know it. But Gandhi's nonviolent resistance derives heavily from it. And Tolstoy, the Russian author who was also a theologian, and Gandhi's farm and commune in South Africa was called Tolstoy Farm. Lots of things I don't have time to go into. And it's a story about how I didn't resist evil. What I say is getting mad at Nikitin wasn't going to help Soviet-American relations any. So I went off and thought about what he said, and I realized that I was reading a lot into it.
Wow.
And the same went on here in our relationship. Many times you would say things, and I would interpret them one way. Like when I used to get squirrely, when I used to get afraid of you, what happened to you?
I got angry.
You got worried that you were a witch.
Yeah.
I got angry that I was.
You got angry at me. Yes, that's true. But underneath it all was the reason was you were afraid you were a witch. So my being squirrely was reinforcing your fear about yourself that you couldn't even, I don't know if you could bring it to consciousness. Maybe you could. And that reinforced my fears of you. And the whole thing just kept going round until we brought it to consciousness. So a lot of the book really is, we even say it, a lot of the book is about living life more
Marty,
consciously.
what's the bottom line, Marty and Dorothea? I have a feeling I know it. With Valentine's Day coming up, what was the bottom line that kept you on the same track, looking for solutions to your unhappiness in your relationship?
I knew that he was the one.
You knew he was the one.
You knew that the day she met me. In fact, tell them the day you met me, you knew that I was the one you, well, I'm going to tell it. You knew I was the man you were going to marry. I wasn't going to marry. I was 20 years old and I wasn't going to get married till I was 35 was my attitude. And you thought, I told you that, Stephen.
Well, and the bottom line for me was compassion.
Compassion. And
Compassion.
I expected the word love to pop up too.
Well, compassion is you have to have love of others and love of yourself.
See, it did come up. I kept reading about love and compassion, and then I also read about how you were in the process of almost exasperation at times, Dorothea. And what was the change for you?
When you threw yourself on the bed.
And Dorothy, how did that happen?
What was the change for me?
Yeah, all of a sudden you guys are getting along. What was it? Was it your
No,
conversation?
it wasn't all of a sudden. It wasn't all of a sudden. It took time.
No, it was a process.
Oh, not all of a sudden.
It was a process. I had a week of silence and I went on a walk. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that in this world, we want this unachievable, unconditional love that doesn't really exist. and that it was my journey here to learn how to do that unconditional love. That's what changed me.
And you also realize that we must have come from someplace where we experienced that, otherwise we wouldn't be wanting it.
Yes.
Say that again, Martin.
She also realized that we must have experienced unconditional love at some point in our existence, probably before we were on the earth. And so this gets into the spiritual and mystical side of things, which some people won't be into, and that's okay.
So the unconditional love has to begin with unconditionally loving ourselves.
Yes, and also we had Dorothy felt in her Balin's experience that we must have experienced this someplace before coming to Earth. Isn't that right, honey?
That's a beautiful statement. We must have experienced it someplace before coming to Earth. If we could only remember that when we're in this moment, when we want to express disapproval, let's say, or that I'm right, you're wrong. I also
Tell them about the card that you taped to the back of our bedroom door.
You can either be right or you can be happy.
you can either be right or you can be happy as a
Which do you want?
You know, we all have these moments when we think our relationship is failing, and it's because why? Why do we feel that way sometimes? What gets in the way of the harmony?
I think it's pushing us toward oneness and compassion. I mean, we wouldn't have done what we've done if we hadn't experienced the problems we had. Would you agree? Like you've said, if life with me had been bearable, you probably would have put up with it. But because it was unbearable, you were going to get it right, which thank God you did.
Well, and a lot of it is ego. I mean, we do want to be right. We do want it our way. We do want the other person to put their clothes in the hamper.
Mhm.
We do, you know, and what? So what? Right?
Uh-huh.
Actually, we just had something about that. There are sometimes when I leave dirty clothes outside the dirty clothes drawer, and you found out that's because my balance is suffering. I'm 79 years old, and so when it's empty, I'll still put things in, although I'll balance myself. But that was something she didn't realize, right?
Yeah. So I just asked him. So now I put his clothes in the hamper if he
Or
leaves them on the floor. So it's you know, it's things that just aren't that important, you know?
You
and
know,
the same is true internationally. Like in Vietnam, if we had gone with Ho Chi Minh in 1919 or 1945, instead of trying to help the French reimpose colonial rule in Indochina, we would have been much better off. Same in Iraq. And by the way, the Christians in Iraq would have been better off. A few years after the American invasion of Iraq, I found a New York Times article that said that 2/3 of the Christians in northern Iraq who had managed to survive under Saddam Hussein had to leave Iraq out of fear of being killed by ISIS.
you
So
see,
we need to really think things through, and we need to realize that nuclear weapons were the initial. Climate change, other things are requiring international cooperation, but nuclear weapons were the first thing, really, in 1945 that made war obsolete. In fact, what Beyond War said was nuclear weapons have made war obsolete, but they haven't made it extinct. And so we need to be working on that. And I did mention to you in the email I sent you that I now am working on rethinking diplomacy, which goes 2 steps further back. It doesn't just look at a conventional war that could lead to a nuclear war. It goes further back in the accident chain, all the way to an incipient crisis that could become a crisis, that could become a war, that could lead to a nuclear war. And we need to apply diplomacy much better than we do. The trouble is we use diplomacy in the wrong way today much too often. Like with North Korea, we say we want we want to negotiate with North Korea, but it's got to be about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which translates into unilateral nuclear disarmament on their part. It would be nice if they do that, but they're not stupid enough. They don't have a death wish. And so we need to base diplomacy in reality. When we do that, we can do amazing things. As, for example, the number of nuclear weapons in the world through diplomacy has been reduced by over 80%
Mhm.
from the peak of the arms race. It's still
With
crazy.
the TPNW, think about that. The TPNW, the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the United Nations, is in all sorts of hot water because people don't get that it's a possibility. And we've
But there's another thing there, Barbara. There's a mistake on both sides. And the mistake of the people pushing that treaty are that they emphasize the treaty as an end in itself. It is an end, but there are steps in the process to get there. We need to look at a positive accident chain where we start with rethinking diplomacy. We start to build better diplomacy with the Russians, with the Chinese, and this is going to require changes on their part too. But right now, no country is trying to produce the required changes.
Wow. I could talk to you again about, because as I said, as I was reading this book, I kept feeling like I was reading history, the history that could have been, the history that could have brought peace, the history that could have worked as it worked in your marriage to bring harmony. And so I remember reading the end of your book, and you said, Marty and I have been together for over 50 years. And so you'll learn that from this book, we had to navigate some very rocky patches and fall in love with our planet. That is key. I remember Robert saying that if we all fell in love with our planet, we would also be able to want to protect our planet, because the people you love and the things you love, you try to protect. And so that was such a simple solution. Let's just fall in love with our planet. We only have one home, and it's just like what you two did in your marriage. You fell back in love with yourself so that you could love each other fully. And then, as you said, Dorothie, in the beginning of our conversation, you haven't had an argument since that period when you discovered it's me that works.
Well, and it took us a long time to discover that was me.
But right, it's me.
But that's absolutely true. And that's one reason we wrote the book, is to try to speed the process up for others.
In fact, during arguments, I used to go into my room and think, I can't do this for me. I can't do this for him. I can only do this for the planet.
Wow.
And you realize, if you couldn't make peace with me, how could you expect world leaders to make peace with one another?
Well, your personal story as David Krieger, my dear friend, no longer on our planet, has helped me to improve the relationship with my wife, even though she has not read the book.
Oh, this is the endorsement that David gave us.
Yes. Your journey of discovery and transformation is one for hope for couples and for our planet.
His wife, Carol Lee, did eventually read the book, by the way.
She would, of course, read it. She is a darling.
She is.
And so is David, so strongly aware of how the reduction in nuclear weapons has occurred and how we can help to do that. Your most thoughtful and unique and fascinating book has kept me reading and kept me awake at night. I can't go to sleep till I read another chapter. Well, and the good news is you're going to share this magic book, and I call it a magic book. Once you get the essence of this book, your life changes. And that's magic to me. It's like you have the magic wand. And you're going to give us a PDF for free. So I'm going to put that in the sponsor. So I'm going to ask you all to download the book and ask some questions. And I'm going to have you back on again. And I just cannot believe it. Now, always at the end of a beautiful time together, I ask, what would you like to leave for the world today? When you are no longer here, what do you hope the world does? Let's start with you, Martin.
I hope that the world recognizes that it's playing with nuclear fire, and that the nuclear threat becomes the nuclear opportunity if we look at it from a different angle. That we finally have the opportunity to build the kind of world we've always wanted to build, beat swords into plowshares, and really we could have the first coming or the second coming, depending on whether you're a Jew or a Christian, of the Messiah, not literally, but figuratively.
Dorothie, what would you say is your gift to the world?
That they can believe that peace is possible.
Oh. Yeah, there's a chapter in the book that starts with the Mark Twain quote, they didn't know it was impossible, so they did it.
I can't say anything after that, because I too believe that peace is possible. And as we uncover those hidden parts of our bodies and our hidden parts of our psyche, and we start to yell at somebody, we say, wait a minute here. Did I read in the book that this is an opportunity for me to look more closely at myself and some of the hidden beliefs that may have been inscribed in my subconscious, right, Dorothie?
Right.
And the other thing is, peace is not only possible, it's necessary for human survival. People don't realize that, and they need to.
Peace is necessary for human survival. We know that. We have to make peace with ourselves, peace with the world, and peace with our loving nature. Nature who provides that kale that I put in my omelets and everything else. And you know, it's so practical. Peace is so practical
It's
that
so
we should,
practical.
it is. It's the only way to share. Like I am always giving kale to my neighbors, and then my neighbor brings me something that I love. And so it's this harmony that you create. And this impressive book is going to be yours. Just download the PDF and read with me. And I'm going to have this beautiful couple back on again, because I think we have questions. Because as we go through our life, we're going to find opportunities for us to discover who we are. And with that, I thank you both. I love your idea for the planet. And I love that peace is possible. And you've discovered that it's possible. And with you at Stanford, Martin, I'm sure you're able to give this message to your students, right?
Well, I'm emeritus, but I do use opportunities to give talks like this podcast. I've done several of these recently. I spoke to the Nobel laureate 6 years ago because of my Turing Award in computer science, which is the top prize there. And so, yeah, I use every opportunity I can. And so Dorothie sometimes laments that she's stuck in bed a lot, and I tell her we're still working together. I'm just doing most of the work now. But I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for her.
You know, there's another part of us that we have in common. I'm reading from the last page of an article I downloaded, and it's about Rotary. We have, I don't know how many thousands of clubs we have now. We have millions of Rotarians. And I think that they are the tipping point if we realize that in the never-ending quest for learning and lasting peace, Rotarians can hear the question, what can one person do? When we look back at Rotary's first century of service, the best answer is look at what one man did. And that's our Paul Harris. And
that's where they stopped the war, I think, between Argentina and Chile that I sent you. Yeah.
So you see, this conversation today has opened up the festival of love, and it opened up the possibility that what we do in our personal life can translate into world peace. And I thank you, Dorothie, and I thank you, Martin, for taking the time. A lot of the book is conversations. Martin will say something on a national, international level, and Dorothie will say, that reminds me of this conversation we had. It's very practical. It's very real. And with that, I say thank you for joining us. This is Barbara Gahn-Mueller, and I'm looking forward to you reading our newsletter, which will come out this week, and to joining us next week. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Dorothie.
Well, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. Every day is Valentine's Day.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? A new map for relationships, creating true love at home and peace on the planet. And with that, I thank you again. God bless you.